Daniel Carter stood frozen in the marble lobby of the Grand Meridian Ballroom, oil still under his fingernails, a leather courier bag burning against his chest. Inside it, charred documents from a highway wreck. Around him, champagne flutes glinted under crystal chandeliers as the city's wealthiest prepared to watch Isabella Hart sign away her empire. He had 90 seconds to reach her before the ink dried, 90 seconds to stop a betrayal she didn't see coming. The security guard's hand was already on his shoulder. If you want to see how a mechanic with a high school diploma takes on corporate power, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The courier's Honda had been accordion folded around the guardrail when Daniel pulled over. Traffic on the 405 had slowed to a crawl, everyone rubbernecking, nobody stopping. Daniel had yanked his pickup onto the shoulder because that's what you did when metal screamed and glass scattered across asphalt like diamonds under brake lights. The courier was already gone. EMTs were loading the body when Daniel spotted the leather bag half buried under the crumpled rear bumper, documents spilling onto oil-slicked pavement. The rain had started, fat drops that would turn those papers to pulp in minutes. He'd grabbed them without thinking, shoved them back into the bag. Notice the embossed gold logo, Asterion Dynamics. Notice the address label, Isabella Hart, CEO. Notice the red urgent stamp bleeding across the envelope. Sir, you need to move your vehicle. A highway patrol officer, young, already exhausted at 9 p.m. on a Friday. Yeah, sorry. Daniel had climbed back into his truck, the bag on the passenger seat, and that should have been the end of it. Drive to the nearest precinct, hand it over, go home to Emma. But the papers were still damp. One had stuck to his hand. And in the dome light, he'd seen it. A clause buried in Section 14, subsection C, written in the kind of language designed to put people to sleep. Performance-based equity reallocation upon material, adverse change. Daniel had spent 4 years getting his hands dirty in machine shops and another 8 raising a daughter alone. But before that, before everything fell apart, he'd been good with numbers, good enough to know when someone was hiding a knife in a contract. He'd made it 3 miles toward the police station before he U-turned. But the Grand Meridian didn't allow mechanics through the front door. Daniel learned this when the valet took one look at his work boots and pointed toward the service entrance. I've got something for Isabella Hart. He held up the bag. From the courier accident on the 405. The valet's expression didn't change. Service entrance is around back, sir. There's not time for service entrance. Daniel walked the long way around, past dumpsters and kitchen exhaust vents, where a loading dock supervisor made 3 phone calls before finally letting him into a concrete hallway that smelled like chlorine and floor wax. A woman in a radio headset appeared, took the bag, looked at Daniel like he'd tracked mud across her carpet. Wait here. She disappeared through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Daniel waited. Through the walls he could hear the muffled pulse of music, the rise and fall of voices in conversation. The gala was already underway. Isabella Hart was probably already on stage, pen in hand, about to... The door burst open. Not the headset woman. Someone else. A man in his 40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. He had the bag. You the one who found this? Yeah, listen, I need to... What's your name? Daniel Carter. Look, there's something in those contracts that Ms. Hart needs to know about before she... How do you know what's in these contracts? Daniel hesitated. I read them. The man's expression went flat. You read confidential corporate documents belonging to Asterion Dynamics. They were on the highway. Anyone could have... But you did. The man stepped closer. What's your angle here? Blackmail? You think you can walk in here with some half-baked theory and... It's not a theory. Daniel kept his voice level. Section 14, subsection C. There's a clause that lets an outside investment group seize majority control if the company hits a rough quarter. And from what I saw in the financials attached to that contract, you're about 2 bad months away from triggering it. The man stared at him. For 3 seconds, the hallway was silent except for the distant thump of bass through the walls. Who sent you? Nobody sent me. I was driving home from work and I saw the crash and I... What do you do, Mr. Carter? I'm a mechanic. The word landed like a stone. The man's face shifted from suspicion to something worse, dismissal. The look people gave you when they had already decided you weren't worth their time. A mechanic. Yeah. You expect me to believe a mechanic understands corporate acquisition law well enough to identify a hostile takeover clause in a document he found on the side of a highway. I didn't say I was... Wait in the hall. The man turned. Security will escort you out. Just let me talk to her for 5 minutes. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if I'm right, and she signs that thing without knowing... The door shut in his face. Daniel stood there, hands curling into fists at his sides. Through the wall, applause erupted. Someone on a microphone, voice smooth and amplified. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew what was happening. The signing ceremony. The cameras. Isabella Hart, smiling for the press, about to put her name on a document that would gut her from the inside out. He looked down the hallway. Service entrance behind him. Authorized door in front. And somewhere beyond that, a ballroom full of people who'd never let him within 50 feet of the stage. Daniel had spent the last 8 years keeping his head down, staying small, building the kind of life where nobody noticed you, because being noticed meant being judged, and being judged meant having to explain why a guy who once wore ties to work now wore grease-stained coveralls. He thought about Emma, asleep at his sister's house, her math homework on the kitchen table, the way she'd looked at him last week when he'd said they couldn't afford the class trip to Sacramento. The careful way she'd said it was fine, really, she didn't mind. He thought about what it felt like to watch something collapse that you could have stopped if you'd just spoken up 10 seconds sooner. Daniel pushed through the door. The ballroom was a wall of sound and light. Chandeliers the size of compact cars, tables draped in white cloth, each centerpiece a small forest of orchids. 500 people in tuxedos and gowns, and Daniel in his Carhartt jacket, crossing the floor like he had every right to be there. Heads turned, conversations stuttered. A woman in a red dress elbowed her companion and pointed. The stage was at the far end, a raised platform with a long table, microphones, cameras. And there she was, Isabella Hart. Smaller than he'd expected somehow. Dark hair swept back, green eyes focused on the man beside her who was saying something that made her smile. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than Daniel's truck, and she held a silver pen like it weighed nothing at all. Security was already moving. 2 men in dark suits cutting through the crowd from opposite directions. Daniel didn't run. Running made you look guilty. He walked faster, threading between tables, keeping his eyes on the stage. People stood up. Someone said, "Excuse me, sir?" Someone else grabbed his arm. He shook them off, 20 feet to the stage, then 15. Isabella Hart was signing the first page. "Ms. Hart!" Daniel's voice cracked through the ballroom. "Don't sign that contract!" Everything stopped. 500 pairs of eyes, cameras swiveling. Isabella Hart, pen frozen mid-stroke, looking up. For 1 second, their eyes met. Hers were the green of bottle glass, sharp and startled. Then security hit him from both sides. Hands on his shoulders, his arms, dragging him backward. He didn't fight it. He just kept talking, loud enough to carry. "Section 14, the performance clause. It's not what you think it is." "Get him out of here." That was the man from the hallway, now striding across the floor, fury in every step. "Adrian, what is this?" Isabella Hart was standing now, the pen still in her hand. Her voice was calm, but Daniel could hear the edge underneath. The question wasn't really for Adrian. It was for everyone. "A disruption, Ms. Hart. We'll handle it." "I'm not disrupting anything." Daniel twisted against the security guard's grip. "I'm trying to help. That contract has a hidden takeover clause that triggers when your stock price drops below, and this man," Adrian announced to the room, his voice ringing with authority, "broke into a secure area and is now making unfounded accusations to sabotage a legally binding agreement. He has no credentials, no standing, and no business being here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed. Daniel felt his face go hot. "I'm a mechanic," he said, and the room laughed harder. "I found the courier bag on the highway after the crash. The documents were damaged, but I read them, and there's a clause in Section 14 that a mechanic," Adrian's smile was a blade, Ladies and gentlemen, we're being lectured on corporate law by a man who changes oil for a living. More laughter, louder now. Daniel felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd kept carefully sealed for 8 years. The humiliation wasn't new. He'd felt it in courtrooms, in therapists' offices, in the principal's office, when Emma's teacher had suggested maybe she needed more stability at home. The feeling of being looked at and found wanting. But this was different. This wasn't about him. This was about a woman holding a pen, about to sign her name on a trap she couldn't see. Ms. Hart. He stopped struggling against the guards, looked directly at her. Please, just read section 14, subsection C before you sign. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes. Isabella Hart was still standing. The pen was still in her hand. Her expression was unreadable. Adrian, she said quietly, let him go. Isabella, this is... Let him go. The security guards released him. Daniel stumbled forward, catching himself on the edge of a table. The ballroom was silent now, waiting. Isabella Hart descended from the stage. She moved like someone used to rooms full of people watching her every step. When she reached Daniel, she stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to make it clear this wasn't a friendly conversation. You have 2 minutes, she said. Explain. Daniel pulled the damaged contract from his jacket. The pages were wrinkled, coffee-stained, one corner charred black from where they'd been too close to the engine fire. He found section 14, held it out. Right here, performance-based equity reallocation upon material adverse change. It sounds like standard investor protection language, but look at the trigger conditions. If your quarterly revenue drops below 85% of projected, which, based on the financials I saw, could happen this winter if the Helix project delays like everyone's saying it will, then the investment group gets to appoint 4 new board members. That's enough to control every major decision. Enough to force a sale if they want. Isabella took the paper. Her eyes scanned the text. Daniel watched her face, looking for recognition, for alarm, for anything. Her expression didn't change. This is a standard stabilization clause, she said finally, designed to protect investor capital during periods of volatility. It's designed to look like that, Daniel said, but check who the investment group is. Check who profits if you lose control. And you determined all of this from reading wet documents on the side of a highway. Yes. In the dark. I had a flashlight. Someone in the crowd snorted. Isabella's lips twitched, but it wasn't a smile. It was something colder. Mr. Carter, she said, I appreciate your concern, but Asterion Dynamics employs an entire legal department whose job is to review contracts like this. They've spent weeks vetting every clause, every condition. You've spent, 20 minutes? 20 minutes was enough. To second-guess a team of Harvard-educated lawyers. To see what they missed. The words hung in the air. Isabella's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Daniel thought she might actually listen, might actually take the document to her lawyers, demand a second review. Then Adrian was there, stepping between them, his hand on Isabella's shoulder. Isabella, the investors are waiting. The press is here. We've already delayed the signing by 10 minutes. He looked at Daniel. This man has made his point. Now it's time for him to leave. I'm not going anywhere until... Security. Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The guards were already moving forward. But Isabella held up one hand. They stopped. She was still looking at Daniel, really looking, like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. You said the courier crashed on the 4:05. Yes. What time? Around 8:45. And you stopped. Of course I stopped. Most people wouldn't have. She tilted her head slightly. Most people would have kept driving. Yeah, well, Daniel shrugged. I'm not most people. No, Isabella said slowly. You're not. Adrian's hand tightened on her shoulder. Isabella. She shrugged him off, looked back at Daniel. 72 hours. What? You have 72 hours to prove your theory. If you can provide evidence that this contract contains a deliberately hidden hostile takeover mechanism, I'll void the agreement and pursue legal action against the investors. If you can't, I sign it as written and you leave me alone. Deal? Daniel blinked. You're serious? I don't make jokes about my company, mister. Carter. Isabella, this is insane. Adrian's voice had gone tight. You're going to let some random mechanic paw through confidential documents based on a conspiracy theory he concocted on the side of the highway? I'm going to let him prove himself wrong, Isabella said, which should take about 6 hours, at which point we sign the agreement and move forward with the stability package exactly as planned. She looked at Daniel, extended her hand. 72 hours, starting now. Daniel shook her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm cool. Up close, she smelled like something expensive and faintly floral. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, hidden under makeup and force of will. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet. Isabella released his hand, turned to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, we're postponing the signing ceremony pending a routine secondary review of the contract language. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. The room erupted in murmurs. Adrian's face had gone red. Isabella ignored him, walking back to the stage, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Daniel stood there, suddenly aware of how badly he was sweating, how out of place he looked, how every eye in the room was on him. A security guard touched his elbow. This way, sir. Daniel followed him out. Not through the service entrance this time. Through the front doors, past the valets, onto the street where his pickup truck sat between a Tesla and a Bentley like a rust-stained middle finger. He sat in the driver's seat for 5 minutes before his hands stopped shaking. Then he pulled out his phone and called his sister. Hey, it's me. Is Emma still up? She fell asleep an hour ago. Why? Where are you? Downtown. Listen, I need you to keep her for the weekend. Maybe longer. Daniel, what's going on? He looked back at the Grand Meridian, at the light spilling from its windows, at the world he'd just crashed into like a stone through glass. I'm not sure yet, he said, but I'll let you know when I figure it out. The Asterion Dynamics building occupied an entire city block downtown, all steel and glass and the kind of architectural ambition that said, we're too important to care what you think. Daniel had driven past it 100 times without really seeing it. Now, standing in the lobby at 7:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, he felt like an ant staring up at a boot. Name? The security desk receptionist didn't look up from her computer. Daniel Carter. I'm here to... ID. He handed over his driver's license. She scanned it, typed something, frowned. You're not in the system. Ms. Hart said I'd have access to... One moment. She picked up a phone, spoke quietly, hung up. Someone will be down to escort you. Daniel waited. The lobby was empty except for a cleaning crew buffing the marble floor and a guy in a suit reading the Wall Street Journal. Somewhere overhead, ventilation systems hummed. The elevator chimed. A woman stepped out, late 20s, blonde hair in a tight bun, carrying a tablet like a shield. She looked at Daniel the way you'd look at a stain. Mr. Carter? That's me? I'm Claire Donovan, Miss Hart's executive assistant. Follow me. The elevator rode in silence. Claire stood on the opposite side, her thumb moving across the tablet screen. They stopped on the 18th floor. More glass. More steel. Conference rooms with names like Artemis and Apollo. Plants that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Claire led him to a small office at the end of the hall. You'll work here. Ms. Hart has granted you access to the contract documents and related financial reports. Everything is confidential. You sign an NDA before you see anything. She handed him a tablet. The document on screen was dense with legal language. Daniel skimmed it. Standard non-disclosure stuff, penalties for breach, binding arbitration. He signed. Claire took the tablet back. You have 72 hours from last night at 10:15 p.m. That gives you until Tuesday at 10:15. If you need to reach Ms. Hart, go through me. Don't approach her directly. Don't speak to the press. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone outside this building. Got it. Do you have any questions? Yeah, where's the coffee? Claire's expression suggested he'd just asked where the bathroom was so he could take a dump on the floor. Break room. 19th floor. She left. Daniel sat in the chair. Expensive, ergonomic, the kind that probably adjusted in 12 directions. The desk held a computer, already logged in, a stack of printed documents, and a post-it note in neat handwriting. All relevant files are in the Stability_Agreement folder. Good luck. He opened the folder. 47 documents. Financial projections, investor backgrounds, legal memos, board meeting minutes. Enough material to keep him reading for a week. Daniel cracked his knuckles and got to work. By noon, he'd made it through the first 15 documents, and his eyes felt like they'd been sandblasted. The coffee on the 19th floor was good, better than the instant crap he made at home, but it wasn't helping. The numbers were starting to blur together. The contract itself was a 200-page monster. Most of it was standard stuff. Performance benchmarks, investor protections, dispute resolution procedures, but the deeper Daniel dug, the more he found threads that didn't quite connect. Section 14 was the obvious problem, but now he was seeing references in Sections 9 and 23, clauses that cross-referenced each other in ways that seemed designed to create confusion. And the investor group, Meridian Capital Holdings, had a structure that made his head hurt. Subsidiaries within subsidiaries, shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands, ownership chains that looped back on themselves. He was sketching a diagram on a legal pad when someone knocked on the door. Daniel looked up. Not Claire. A man, mid-50s, gray hair, expensive suit. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd spent his life winning arguments. Mr. Carter. The man stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I'm Richard Voss, General Counsel for Asterion Dynamics. Okay. I wanted to introduce myself, see how the review is going. It's going. Voss smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I understand you have concerns about Section 14. Among other things, I'm curious what qualifications you're bringing to this analysis. Voss sat down across from Daniel, crossed his legs. Ms. Hart mentioned you're a mechanic. I am. Did you study law? No. Corporate finance? No. Contract negotiation? Look, I get it. I'm not qualified, but I know how to read, and I know when something doesn't add up. Voss leaned back. Mr. Carter, I've been practicing corporate law for 30 years. My team spent 6 weeks reviewing this agreement. We consulted with external auditors, conducted risk assessments, and reviewed comparable transactions. Are you suggesting we missed something that you, with your, he gestured vaguely at Daniel, unique perspective managed to spot in 20 minutes? Yeah. Based on what expertise? Daniel set down his pen. I used to work at Kellerman Strategic Group. Voss's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. The consulting firm. Yeah. When? 8 years ago. What did you do there? Risk analysis, corporate restructuring. I'd look at companies about to go under and figure out if they could be saved or if someone was better off buying the pieces. Daniel kept his voice flat. I was pretty good at it, until I wasn't. Why did you leave? That's not relevant. I think it is. Voss pulled out his phone, typed something. There was an incident. A client collapse. Accusations of negligence. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. I was cleared. Cleared doesn't mean innocent. It means I didn't break any laws. But you left the industry. Voss pocketed his phone. And now you fix cars. So forgive me if I'm skeptical about your sudden return to corporate analysis. Believe what you want, Daniel said, but I'm right about that contract. Then prove it, Voss stood. You have 54 hours left, Mr. Carter. I suggest you use them wisely. He left the door open behind him. Daniel stared at the doorway for a long moment. Then he went back to his legal pad, to the diagram of subsidiaries and shell companies that was starting to look like a spider web. By 6 p.m., Daniel had filled 3 legal pads and consumed enough coffee to fuel a small aircraft. The pieces were there. He could feel them, just out of reach, like trying to remember a word that lived on the tip of his tongue. Meridian Capital Holdings was the key. They weren't a traditional investment group. They specialized in distressed acquisitions, buying companies right before they collapsed, stripping them for parts, selling the assets. They'd done it to tech firms, pharmaceutical companies, even a regional airline. And they were good at it. Good enough that most of their targets never saw them coming. The question was how they planned to trigger the collapse, because that's what Section 14 required. Material adverse change. A drop in revenue significant enough to justify investor intervention. Daniel pulled up Asterion's financial reports. The company was healthy, maybe not thriving, but stable. Their main revenue stream came from the Helix project, a biotech platform for personalized medicine that was supposed to launch next year. Pre-orders were strong. Investor confidence was high. Unless something went wrong. Daniel opened a new document, started listing potential failure points, supply chain disruptions, regulatory delays, key personnel departures, lawsuits, data breaches. Any one of them could be manufactured. Any one of them could tank a quarter's revenue enough to trigger the clause. He was 3 pages into his list when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Carter? A woman's voice, professional, clipped. This is Elena Rodriguez from Channel 7 News. I'm working on a story about the disruption at last night's gala. I was hoping you might... Daniel hung up. The phone buzzed again. Different number. He ignored it. By the time he left the office at 9 p.m., he'd received 7 calls from reporters and 12 emails. Someone had leaked his name to the press. Someone wanted him talking. Daniel drove home through empty streets, his head still full of numbers and clauses and shell companies. He lived in a duplex in Glendale, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that smelled permanently of bacon grease from the previous tenant. Emma's backpack was by the door, her shoes scattered across the entry like casualties. The house felt too quiet without her. Daniel microwaved leftover Chinese food and ate standing at the counter, staring at his phone. He should call his sister, tell her what was happening, but he didn't know what to say yet. Didn't know if he was chasing something real or just the ghost of who he used to be. He thought about Isabella Hart signing that contract with her silver pen. Thought about the exhaustion in her eyes. Thought about Adrian Cross's hand on her shoulder, proprietary and protective. Daniel finished his food and went to bed. He didn't sleep much. Sunday morning, he was back at Asterion by 6 a.m. Claire met him in the lobby with another NDA and a security badge that let him access the 18th floor without an escort. Ms. Hart wants an update, Claire said. Tell her I'm making progress. She wants specifics. Tell her I'll have specifics when I'm done. Claire's expression suggested she'd rather tell him where to shove his progress, but she just nodded and walked away. Daniel spent the morning pulling financial records. He wanted to see Asterion's quarterly performance over the last 3 years. Wanted to map their revenue streams, identify patterns. If Meridian Capital was planning to tank the company, they'd need to know where to apply pressure. By noon, he'd found something. Asterion's revenue came primarily from 3 sources: the Helix project pre-orders, a portfolio of existing pharmaceutical patents, and a contract manufacturing agreement with a European biotech firm called Novacorp. The manufacturing contract was the stable one, predictable income, low risk, except the contract was up for renewal in January, and Novacorp had been shopping for alternative manufacturers since August. Daniel pulled up the renewal projections. If Novacorp walked, Asterion would lose roughly 15% of its quarterly revenue. Not catastrophic, but significant. Combined with any delays on the Helix project, it would be enough to drop them below the 85% threshold, enough to trigger Section 14. He was reaching for his phone when the office door opened. Isabella Hart walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Daniel. "You look like you need this more than I do." "Thanks." He took the cup. It was still hot. "I thought I was supposed to go through Claire." "Claire doesn't work Sundays." Isabella sat down across from him, crossed her legs. She was dressed more casually today, jeans, a sweater, no makeup that he could see. She looked younger, tired. "I wanted to check on you myself." "Why?" "Because you crashed my gala, accused my investors of fraud, and convinced me to delay a billion-dollar deal based on a theory you developed in your pickup truck." She sipped her coffee. "I'm curious whether you're brilliant or insane. Can I be both?" Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "How's the investigation going?" Daniel turned his laptop around, showed her the diagram. "Meridian Capital isn't what they appear to be. They're not investors. They're scavengers. They specialize in buying distressed companies, dismantling them, selling the pieces for profit." Isabella studied the screen. "Go on." "Your Novacorp contract is up for renewal in January. If they walk, you lose 15% of your quarterly revenue. Combine that with any Helix delays and you Trigger the material adverse change clause. Meridian gets board control. They force a sale. You lose the company. That's speculation. It's pattern recognition. Daniel pulled up another document. Meridian did the same thing to Helix Biosystems 3 years ago, and to Quantum Therapeutics before that. They identify vulnerable companies, negotiate investment deals with hidden triggers, then manufacture the conditions that activate those triggers. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. The Novacorp contract renewal is already in progress. We're close to agreement. Who's handling the negotiation? Adrian. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. Your fiancé. Yes? Isabella's voice had gone careful. Is that relevant? I don't know yet. He opened another file. But I'd like to see the communication records between Adrian and Meridian Capital. Emails, phone logs, meeting notes. Those are confidential. So is this entire investigation? Isabella set down her coffee cup. For a moment, she just looked at him. Daniel couldn't read her expression. Couldn't tell if she was angry or amused or something else entirely. You're asking me to investigate my fiancé based on a hunch. I'm asking you to verify whether your fiancé has been coordinating with the same investment group that's trying to take your company. And if he has, then you know who to trust. Daniel held her gaze. And who not to. Isabella stood, walked to the window. Outside, the city stretched away in concrete and glass, the Sunday streets quiet. She stayed there for a long time, one hand pressed against the window, her reflection ghostly in the tinted glass. When she finally turned around, her face was set. I'll get you the records, she said. But Daniel? Yeah? If you're wrong about this, we're done. You sign the NDA, you walk away, and you never mention Asterion Dynamics again. Understood? Understood. And if you're right, she trailed off, shook her head. Let's hope you're wrong. She left. Daniel sat alone in the office, drinking coffee that had gone cold, staring at the spiderweb diagram on his screen. He thought about Emma, about the class trip to Sacramento she'd said she didn't mind missing. Thought about the life he'd built, small and safe and carefully controlled. Thought about the mechanic who'd stopped at a car crash because it was the right thing to do. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, back off while you still can. Daniel deleted it. Then he got back to work. The communication records arrived Monday morning in a password-protected file that made Daniel's laptop wheeze like an asthmatic. 15,000 emails, 3 years of calendar entries, phone logs that read like a small-town directory. Claire had dropped the access credentials on his desk without a word, her face carefully blank, and Daniel knew what that meant. Isabella had made her choice. Now he had to prove she hadn't made the wrong one. He started with the emails, searching for anything involving Adrian Cross and Meridian Capital. The first 100 results were routine. Meeting confirmations, contract drafts, the usual corporate back and forth that sounded important but said nothing. Then he hit email 107. It was from Adrian to someone named Marcus Webb at Meridian, dated 6 months ago. The subject line read Q3 projections, confidential. Daniel opened it. Marcus, per our discussion, I'm attaching Asterion's internal revenue forecasts for Q3 and Q4. Note the Novacorp contract vulnerability we discussed. Timing will be critical. Let's schedule a call to discuss next steps. Daniel read it 3 times. Then he pulled up Marcus Webb's profile. Senior Vice President at Meridian Capital Holdings, 20 years in distressed asset acquisition. A photograph showed a man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of smile that belonged in a shark documentary. He kept digging, found another email 2 weeks later. Then another. A whole thread of correspondence between Adrian and Marcus, each one carefully worded, each one dancing around direct statements but making the intent clear. Adrian was feeding Meridian information, internal forecasts, contract vulnerabilities, board dynamics, everything they'd need to engineer a hostile takeover. Daniel's phone rang. Claire. Ms. Hart wants to see you. Her office. Now. I'm in the middle of... Now, Mr. Carter. The line went dead. Daniel saved his work, locked his computer, and took the elevator to the 23rd floor. Isabella's office occupied a corner suite with windows on 2 walls and a view that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. She stood at one of those windows now, her back to the door, phone pressed to her ear. I don't care what the board thinks, Richard. We're not moving forward until the review is complete. She paused, listened. Then they can wait. I'll call you back. She hung up, turned to face Daniel. Her expression was unreadable. Close the door. He did. You've been going through Adrian's emails. Yes. Find anything interesting? Daniel pulled out his phone, opened the screenshots he'd taken. He's been feeding information to Meridian Capital for at least 6 months. Internal projections, contract negotiations, strategic vulnerabilities, everything they'd need to know to trigger the takeover clause at exactly the right moment. Isabella took the phone, scrolled through the images. Her face didn't change, but her knuckles went white where she gripped the device. This could be innocent, she said finally. Investor relations, standard disclosure. At 2 a.m., through his personal email account, he works late. Isabella. Daniel kept his voice gentle. He's setting you up. She handed back the phone, walked to her desk, sat down. For a moment, she just stared at the surface, clean, organized, everything in its place. Then she picked up a small glass paperweight, turned it over in her hands. We've been together for 3 years, she said quietly. Engaged for 8 months. I know him, Daniel. He's ambitious, yes. Aggressive sometimes. But he's not a traitor. Then help me prove he's not. Daniel sat down across from her. Let me talk to him. Ask him about these emails directly. If there's an innocent explanation, he'll give it. And if there isn't, then you know what you're dealing with. Isabella set down the paperweight, looked at him. You don't trust easily, do you? I trusted someone once. It didn't work out. The incident at Kellerman's strategic group. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's not relevant. It is if it's affecting your judgment now. If you're seeing conspiracies where there are only, I saw a company collapse because I believed the wrong person. His voice came out harder than he intended. I saw people lose their jobs, their savings, their futures. And I had to sit there and watch it happen because I was too stupid to see what was right in front of me. So yeah, maybe I don't trust easily anymore. Maybe I see threats where other people see coincidences. But I'd rather be paranoid and wrong than trusting and destroyed. The office was quiet, except for the hum of ventilation and the distant sound of traffic 23 floors below. Isabella stood. Adrian is flying back from San Francisco this afternoon. He'll be here at 4. You can ask him then. You're going to tell him I've been investigating? I'm going to tell him we're conducting a routine security audit of investor communications. You'll be present as a consultant. He doesn't need to know anything beyond that. She walked to the door, opened it. And Daniel? If you're wrong about this, if you're letting your past cloud your judgment, I will make sure you never work in this city again. Are we clear? Crystal. Good. Claire will bring you to the conference room at 4. She left. Daniel sat alone in the office, surrounded by windows and sky and the weight of everything he'd just set in motion. His phone buzzed. A text from his sister. Emma keeps asking when you're coming home. What do I tell her? He typed back, soon. Tell her I'm working on something important. His sister replied immediately. Is this about that gala thing? I saw your name in the news. Daniel, what the hell are you doing? Daniel turned off his phone. At 3:45, Claire appeared at his office door. She didn't say anything, just gestured for him to follow. They took the elevator to the 21st floor, walked down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably had names and meanings Daniel would never understand, and stopped at a conference room with glass walls and a table that could seat 20. Isabella was already there. So was Richard Voss, the lawyer who'd questioned Daniel on Saturday. And sitting at the head of the table, looking relaxed and confident in a gray suit that fit like it had been tailored by someone who understood how fabric and power intersected, was Adrian Cross. He stood when Daniel entered, extended his hand. Mr. Carter, I've been looking forward to meeting you properly. Daniel shook his hand. Adrian's grip was firm, practiced, the handshake of someone who'd learned to communicate confidence through physical touch. Thanks for taking the time. Of course. Adrian sat back down. Isabella tells me you've been conducting a security audit. Impressive work, from what I hear, finding vulnerabilities others might miss. That's one way to put it. I admire thoroughness. Adrian smiled. It was warm, genuine, the kind of smile that made you want to trust him. In my experience, the best protection against threats is knowing they exist. So please, ask whatever you need to ask. Daniel pulled out his laptop, opened the email thread, turned the screen so Adrian could see it. Can you explain these communications with Marcus Webb at Meridian Capital? Adrian leaned forward, scanned the emails. His expression didn't change. Of course. Marcus and I have been coordinating on the investment agreement. He needed certain financial projections to assess risk exposure. Standard due diligence. At 2 in the morning through your personal email? I work odd hours, and I prefer to keep investor relations separate from my corporate account. Cleaner that way. You shared internal revenue forecasts, Daniel said. Information that isn't part of standard disclosure packages. Information that investors are entitled to when making billion-dollar commitments. Adrian's voice remained pleasant. Is there a problem? You highlighted the Novacorp contract as a vulnerability. Because it is a vulnerability. We're in the middle of renewal negotiations. Any competent investor would want to know that. You discussed timing being critical. Timing is always critical in contract negotiations, Mr. Carter. Surely you understand that. Daniel felt the room shifting. Adrian wasn't defensive, wasn't rattled. Every answer came smoothly, accompanied by the kind of reasonable tone that made doubt seem paranoid. These communications, Richard Voss said, speaking for the first time, appear to show exactly what Mr. Cross says they show. An engaged partner keeping investors informed. Nothing unusual, nothing improper. Unless the intent was to help those investors identify the exact moment to trigger a takeover clause, Daniel said. Intent. Adrian leaned back. That's a tricky thing to prove, isn't it? You can see my emails, read my words, but you can't know what I was thinking. And in the absence of proof, you're just guessing. I'm connecting dots. You're seeing patterns where there are only coincidences. Adrian looked at Isabella. Darling, I know you felt compelled to pursue this investigation. I respect that. But we're 48 hours away from the deadline, and Mr. Carter has produced nothing but speculation and circumstantial evidence. Meanwhile, our investors are getting nervous. The board is asking questions. We're damaging relationships based on the paranoid fantasies of a man who, forgive me, crashed your gala and made unfounded accusations to sabotage a deal he doesn't understand. Isabella's face was carefully neutral. Daniel, do you have any direct evidence of coordination between Adrian and Meridian beyond these emails? Not yet. Do you have evidence that these emails represent anything other than standard investor relations? The pattern suggests pattern isn't evidence. She stood. I appreciate your diligence, Daniel, truly. But unless you can produce something concrete, documented proof of fraud, recordings of explicit planning, financial transfers, I can't justify delaying the agreement any longer. Give me the rest of the 72 hours. You've had 72 hours, Adrian said gently. You've had access to every document, every communication, every piece of data you asked for. And you've found nothing criminal, nothing unethical, just a series of emails that could be interpreted in ways that confirm your pre-existing theory. He stood, walked to where Daniel sat, put a hand on his shoulder. The gesture was friendly, almost paternal. I know what it's like to want to be the hero, Adrian said quietly. To want to save someone from a threat only you can see. But sometimes the threat isn't real. Sometimes it's just our own fear dressed up as intuition. Daniel stood, stepped away from Adrian's hand, looked at Isabella. You're making a mistake. Perhaps, she said, but it's my mistake to make. Is it? Daniel picked up his laptop. Or is it Meridian's? He left the conference room, walked past Claire, who was suddenly very interested in her tablet, took the elevator down to the 18th floor, packed his legal pads and notes into his backpack. The office already felt like a place he'd never been, a space that would forget him the moment he closed the door. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Parking garage. Level B3. Now. Daniel stared at the message, debated deleting it, then grabbed his keys and headed for the elevator. The parking garage was concrete and fluorescent lights and the smell of motor oil. Level B3 was nearly empty. A handful of expensive cars scattered across 50 spaces. Daniel's boots echoed as he walked between the pillars, hand in his pocket, fingers wrapped around his keys in a grip that could double as a weapon if needed. A figure stepped from behind a black Mercedes. Woman, late 30s, dark hair, wearing a pantsuit and the expression of someone who'd seen things that kept her up at night. "Mr. Carter." "Who are you?" "Elena Martinez. I'm a forensic accountant." She held up her hands, showing they were empty. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help." "Help with what?" "Proving Adrian Cross is exactly what you think he is." She walked closer, stopped 6 feet away. "I used to work for Meridian Capital. I was part of the team that structured the Helix Biosystems acquisition and the Quantum Therapeutics deal. I know how they operate. I know what they're planning for Asterion." Daniel's hand didn't leave his pocket. "If you've got information, why not go to Isabella directly?" "Because she won't believe me. She'll think I'm a disgruntled ex-employee or a competitor trying to sabotage the deal. But you've already planted the seed of doubt. She's listening to you, even if she doesn't want to admit it. She just kicked me off the investigation. Because Adrian is good at what he does. He's been grooming her for 3 years, building trust, making himself indispensable. But he's not perfect. He makes mistakes. And I know where the bodies are buried." Elena pulled a thumb drive from her pocket, held it out. "This contains wire transfer records showing payments from Meridian to Adrian going back 18 months, offshore accounts, shell companies. The money trail is convoluted, but it's there. He's being paid to deliver Asterion to Meridian, and once they have control, they'll strip the company for parts and sell it off within 6 months." Daniel looked at the thumb drive, didn't take it. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I'm tired of watching good companies get destroyed by people who see businesses as nothing but assets to liquidate." Elena's voice went tight. "I helped them do it. I built the financial structures that made it possible, and I'm trying to make amends. By committing corporate espionage. By telling the truth before someone else gets hurt." Daniel took the thumb drive. "If this is fake, it's not. Check it yourself. Trace the transfers. Match them to Adrian's calendar entries. You'll see. He's been meeting with Meridian executives on the same days money moved into his accounts." "How did you get this?" Elena smiled. It wasn't a happy expression. "I still have friends at Meridian. People who think what they're doing to Asterion crosses a line. People who wanted someone to stop it." She stepped back. "You've got until tomorrow at 10:15. That's when Isabella signs. Make it count." She walked to the Mercedes, got in, drove away. Daniel stood in the concrete silence of the parking garage, thumb drive hot against his palm, and felt the weight of choice settle over him like a physical thing. He could walk away. Go home to Emma. Tell Isabella he'd tried and failed and let the billionaires sort out their own problems, or he could dig deeper into a pit that might bury him. He got in his truck and drove to a FedEx office 3 miles away. Paid for 2 hours of computer time in a private room. Plugged in the thumb drive. The files were exactly what Elena had promised. Bank records, wire transfers, company filings. 300 pages of financial documentation showing money flowing from Meridian Capital Holdings through a web of shell companies, Apex Ventures, Summit Group, Cascade Holdings, before finally landing in accounts registered to something called Cross Family Trust. Daniel cross-referenced the dates with Adrian's calendar entries pulled from the email records Isabella had given him access to. Every major transfer lined up with a meeting, breakfast with Marcus Webb, dinner with Meridian's CFO, a weekend trip to the Cayman Islands that Adrian's calendar listed as personal time that coincided with a $2 million deposit. Daniel printed everything, organized it into a folder. Then he pulled out his phone and called the one person he knew would answer even though it was nearly midnight. Carter. His old boss at Kellerman Strategic Group, Tom Brennan, sounded tired. "It's been a long time. I need a favor." "Oh, you called in your last favor 8 years ago when I agreed not to press charges." "I didn't steal anything, Tom. You know that. I know you took client files when you left. I know you accessed confidential databases without authorization. Whether you call that stealing or borrowing, the result was the same. I had to explain to the board why one of my analysts went rogue. I was trying to prove the client was committing fraud. You were trying to be a hero. And instead you destroyed your career and nearly took mine down with you. Tom sighed. What do you want, Daniel? I need you to verify some financial records, wire transfers, shell company structures, the kind of thing that looks clean on the surface but might be covering something illegal underneath. Why? Because I'm trying to stop a hostile takeover and I need someone who knows how to read corporate money trails. And you think I'm going to help you after what happened last time? I think you're going to help me because you're a decent person who doesn't like watching companies get destroyed by vultures. Tom was quiet for a long time. Send me what you have. I'll look at it. But Daniel, if this blows up, I'm not covering for you. Not again. I wouldn't ask you to. Daniel scanned the documents, sent them encrypted. Then he sat in the FedEx office private room, surrounded by the hum of printers and the glow of fluorescent lights, and waited. His phone rang 40 minutes later. Where did you get this? Tom's voice was tight. Confidential source. Daniel, this is wire fraud, money laundering. If these records are accurate, the person receiving these payments is committing multiple felonies. Can you verify they're real? I can verify the accounts exist. I can verify the transfers occurred. Whether the documentation is authentic or fabricated would require a full forensic audit, but based on what I'm seeing, this looks legitimate. Well, legitimate meaning the fraud is real. Legitimate meaning someone went to a lot of trouble to hide money moving from point A to point B through points C, D, E, F, and G. The only reason to do that is if you don't want anyone knowing about the payments. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Thanks, Tom. Daniel, be careful. Whoever you're investigating, they're connected. They're protected. And if they're willing to commit fraud on this scale, they're willing to do worse to protect themselves. I'll keep that in mind. He hung up, gathered his documents, paid for the printing, walked out into a night that smelled like rain and exhaust and the particular electricity that hung over the city right before a storm. His truck was still in the Asterion parking garage. He'd have to go back for it. But first, he had one more stop to make. The address Isabella had listed on her official bio was a penthouse in downtown, the kind of building with doormen and marble lobbies, and the sort of security that made you prove you belonged before they'd let you breathe the same air as the residents. Daniel expected to be turned away at the entrance. Instead, the doorman took one look at him and said, Ms. Hart is expecting you. 23rd floor. The elevator was lined with mirrors. Daniel looked at himself. Rumpled jacket, 2 days of stubble, eyes that hadn't seen enough sleep in weeks. He looked like exactly what he was. A man out of his depth, holding evidence that could destroy lives, standing in an elevator that cost more than his annual salary. The doors opened. Isabella stood in the hallway, barefoot, wearing jeans and a Yale sweatshirt, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different, younger, more vulnerable. How did you know I was coming? Daniel asked. The garage attendant called when you left with a woman I didn't recognize. I had security pull the footage. I ran her face through our database. Elena Martinez, former Meridian employee, terminated 6 months ago for undisclosed reasons. Isabella stepped aside. Come in. We need to talk. The penthouse was glass and steel in space, the kind of apartment where the view was the furniture. City lights stretched away in every direction, a carpet of electric stars. Isabella walked to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed one to Daniel. I'm guessing Elena gave you something interesting. Daniel set down his folder. Wire transfer record showing 2 years of payments from Meridian to Adrian. 18 transfers. $4.6 million total. Isabella's hand tightened on her glass. She didn't drink. Just stood there, staring at the folder like it might explode. Let me see. Daniel opened it. Spread the documents across her granite counter. Bank records. Corporate filings. Calendar entries. Everything laid out in chronological order, painting a picture so clear a child could understand it. Isabella read in silence. 1 page, then another, then another. Her face didn't change, her breathing didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, collapsed inward, like a building losing its foundation. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry but empty. I was going to marry him. I know. We picked out rings together, started looking at houses, Talked about whether we wanted kids right away or if we should wait until after the Helix launch. Her voice was flat, factual. Last week, he told me he loved me. He said it while we were making breakfast. I was scrambling eggs and he was reading the newspaper and he just looked up and said it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Isabella, don't. She held up a hand. Don't apologize. Don't say you're sorry. Don't tell me it's going to be okay. Just... She stopped, took a breath. Just tell me what happens now. Now we take this to the board. We void the Meridian Agreement. We report Adrian to the SEC for fraud and coordination in a conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. And then? Then you rebuild. That's simple. Nothing about this is simple. Daniel finished his whiskey, set down the glass. But you asked me to prove whether you could trust him. Now you know. Isabella walked to the window, pressed her palm against the glass like she could push through it, fall into the city lights and disappear. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. How did you know? When you saw that contract, when everyone else saw standard language and you saw a trap, how did you know? Because I've seen it before. I've been the person who trusted the wrong data, believed the wrong projections, defended the wrong people because I wanted so badly for them to be who I thought they were. And I watched everything collapse because I was too stubborn to see the truth when it was right in front of me. The incident at Kellerman. Yeah. What happened? Daniel looked at her. At this woman who'd given him 72 hours and access to everything, who'd taken a risk on a mechanic with a theory when she could have had him thrown out. Who was standing in her penthouse in bare feet, learning that the man she loved had spent 3 years lying to her. I had a client, he said. Tech startup. Brilliant founder. Revolutionary product. Investors lined up around the block. I was assigned to do risk assessment, and everything looked good. Too good. But the founder was so passionate, so convinced, so... He stopped. I ignored the red flags, signed off on the assessment. 6 months later, the company collapsed. Turned out the founder had been fabricating user metrics. Investors lost everything. And I had to sit in depositions explaining how I'd missed something a junior analyst should have caught. But you were cleared. Legally, yeah. I hadn't broken any laws. I'd just been incompetent, naive, so desperate to believe in something that I stopped asking the hard questions. Daniel looked down at his hands. I left Kellerman before they could fire me. Spent a year working odd jobs trying to figure out who I was if I wasn't the guy who could see through corporate bullshit. Then Emma's mom died and I had a 6-year-old daughter and no time to feel sorry for myself. So I became a mechanic, because engines don't lie. You can see exactly what's broken and exactly how to fix it. Until you found a contract on the highway. Until I found a contract on the highway. Isabella turned from the window. Her eyes were red but still dry. The board meets tomorrow at 9. I want you there. They won't listen to me. They will if I tell them to. She walked over, picked up the folder. Go home, Daniel. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we end this. Daniel headed for the door, stopped, looked back. For what it's worth, he's an idiot. Anyone who'd betray you isn't smart enough to deserve you in the first place. For what it's worth, Isabella said, you were never incompetent. You were just human, and that's not a crime. Daniel left. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up. The doorman nodded as he passed. The city air hit him like a wave, cold and damp and smelling like rain that would come before morning. He drove to the duplex in Glendale, walked inside. Emma's shoes were still by the door, her backpack still in the hall. He stood there for a long time thinking about choices and consequences and the difference between being right and being too late. Then he called his sister. I'm coming to get Emma tomorrow afternoon. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I love her. And tell her Daddy's been doing something important and it's almost done. He slept 4 hours. The nightmares were worse than usual. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, but Daniel arrived at 8:30 because showing up late to your own execution seemed like bad form. Claire met him in the lobby with an expression that suggested she'd been hoping he wouldn't show, then escorted him to the 23rd floor without a word. The silence in the elevator was thick enough to chew. The boardroom occupied the east corner of the building, all windows and mahogany and chairs that probably had more engineering in them than Daniel's truck. 12 seats around a table designed to make important men feel important. 10 of those seats were already filled when Daniel walked in. Richard Voss sat at the far end, reading something on his tablet. 3 other suits Daniel didn't recognize occupied the middle positions, looking at him the way you'd look at a stain on expensive carpet. And at the head of the table sat a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that could cut diamonds. Margaret Chen, Asterian's board chair. She'd made her fortune in venture capital before retiring to collect board seats the way some people collected art. Isabella stood by the windows, her back to the room, phone pressed to her ear. She wore a charcoal suit that made her look like she could buy and sell everyone in the room without breaking a sweat. When she turned and saw Daniel, something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe. Or regret. "Everyone's here," Margaret said. "Let's begin." Adrian walked in 30 seconds later, looking like a man who'd slept well and had nothing to hide. He smiled at the board, nodded to Isabella, ignored Daniel completely. Took a seat across from Daniel like they were about to discuss quarterly earnings instead of corporate espionage. "Good morning." Margaret's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "Ms. Hart has called this emergency meeting to discuss concerns regarding the Meridian Capital Investment Agreement. Isabella, the floor is yours." Isabella remained standing. She looked at each board member in turn, then at Adrian, then at Daniel. When she spoke, her voice was steady. 4 days ago, Daniel Carter interrupted our signing ceremony with allegations that the Meridian Agreement contained hidden provisions designed to facilitate a hostile takeover. I gave him 72 hours to prove his theory. He's proven it. She nodded to Daniel. He stood, pulled out the folder, began distributing copies around the table. Wire transfer records, bank statements, calendar cross-references. The evidence laid bare in black and white. "What you're looking at," Isabella continued, "is documentation showing systematic payments from Meridian Capital Holdings to Adrian Cross over the past 18 months. $4.6 million moved through shell companies and offshore accounts. The timing of these transfers corresponds exactly with Adrian's meetings with Meridian executives." The room went quiet. Adrian's smile didn't waver. "Additionally," Isabella said, "we've identified communications between Adrian and Marcus Webb, Meridian's senior VP, in which confidential Asterion financial data was shared. Internal projections, contract vulnerabilities, strategic information that would allow an outside party to identify the optimal moment to trigger the takeover clause hidden in Section 14 of the investment agreement." Margaret was flipping through the documents, her expression unreadable. Voss had set down his tablet. The other board members were exchanging glances. "These are serious allegations," Margaret said. "Adrian, what's your response?" Adrian leaned back in his chair. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who'd been expecting this and had his answers prepared. "My response is that Ms. Hart has been misled by someone with a personal vendetta and a history of professional misconduct." He gestured toward Daniel. "Mr. Carter was terminated from Kellerman Strategic Group 8 years ago following a catastrophic error in judgment that cost investors millions. Since then, he's been working as a mechanic, and now, suddenly, he's a forensic accountant, he's a corporate investigator, he's qualified to interpret complex financial documents." "The documents speak for themselves," Daniel said. "Do they?" Adrian picked up one of the bank statements. "These transfers you're calling bribes are consulting fees. Meridian hired me 6 months before the investment negotiation began to provide strategic guidance on Asterion's market position. Everything was disclosed in my conflict of interest statement filed with the board in January." Voss was nodding. "I reviewed that statement myself. Mr. Cross properly disclosed his consulting relationship with Meridian Capital." Consulting fees don't get paid through shell companies," Daniel said. "They do when the client requests privacy." Adrian's voice remained pleasant. "Meridian deals with sensitive acquisitions. They prefer to keep their consultant relationships confidential to avoid market speculation. The shell companies are standard practice in private equity." "What about the confidential data you shared?" Isabella's voice had gone tight. "Internal projections, revenue forecasts, information that was necessary for Meridian to conduct proper due diligence, information that I was authorized to share as part of my role in facilitating the investment discussion." Adrian looked at her. "Darling, I understand you're upset, Mr. Carter has spent the last 72 hours poisoning your perception of me. But nothing I did was illegal or unethical. I was trying to secure the best possible terms for Asterion. By telling them exactly where we're vulnerable? By being honest about our challenges so they couldn't use that information against us later. Adrian stood, walked around the table. Isabella, I love you. I love this company. Everything I've done has been in service of protecting both. If I wanted to destroy Asterion, I've had 3 years and unlimited access to do it. Instead, I've helped you build it into one of the most valuable biotech firms in the country. He was good, Daniel had to admit. The reasonable tone, the hurt expression, the appeal to emotion wrapped in just enough logic to make doubt seem paranoid. The consulting disclosure doesn't explain the timing, Daniel said. Every major transfer happened within 72 hours of a meeting where you discussed Asterion's vulnerabilities with Meridian executives. Correlation isn't causation, Mr. Carter. I'm sure you learned that at— Oh wait, you didn't finish college, did you? Adrian's smile sharpened. Forgive me. I sometimes forget that not everyone in this room has formal education in corporate finance. I have formal education in recognizing when someone's lying. Based on what credentials? Your sterling track record at Kellerman? Your years of expertise changing oil? Based on the fact that you're sweating. Adrian wasn't sweating, but the observation made him touch his collar, a reflexive gesture that betrayed more than any amount of moisture could have. Margaret raised her hand. Gentlemen, that's enough. Richard, what's your legal assessment? Voss took his time answering. The consulting arrangement appears to have been properly disclosed. The payments, while unusual in structure, aren't inherently illegal. The sharing of confidential information is more problematic. But if Mr. Cross was authorized to share that data as part of facilitating the investment discussion, it's not necessarily actionable. Who authorized him? Daniel asked. Voss consulted his tablet. According to the board minutes from January 15th, the board granted Mr. Cross broad authority to negotiate terms with Meridian, including sharing necessary financial data to facilitate due diligence. I didn't grant him authority to hand over our entire strategic playbook, Isabella said. The minutes don't specify limits on what constitutes necessary financial data, Voss said. That's a gray area. It's not gray. Daniel pulled out another document. This is the original investment agreement Meridian proposed 6 months ago, before Adrian started consulting. Notice anything different from the version we were about to sign? He laid both contracts side by side, highlighted the relevant sections. The original agreement had standard investor protections, market rate returns, minority board representation. The version we were signing gives Meridian majority control if revenue drops below 85% of projection. That clause wasn't in the original proposal. It was added 3 months ago, right after Adrian's third payment from Meridian. The room went quiet again. Margaret was comparing the documents, her finger tracing the highlighted sections. Adrian, she said carefully, did you recommend this change to the agreement? I recommended stronger investor protections to make the deal more attractive, Adrian said. Meridian was hesitant to commit without additional security measures. Security measures that would give them control of the company. In the unlikely event of significant revenue decline, yes. But our projections show— Your projections are based on the NovaCorp contract renewal, Daniel interrupted. A renewal you've been negotiating for 6 months. A renewal that's been stalled since August, despite NovaCorp's expressed interest in continuing the relationship. Why would a routine contract renewal take 6 months unless someone was deliberately slowing it down? Adrian's jaw tightened. I'm not deliberately— Show us the NovaCorp correspondence, Isabella said. All of it. Isabella, this is absurd. You're letting a disgraced consultant with a grudge against successful people manipulate you into— Show us the correspondence, Adrian. I don't have to justify my work to— You do if you want to keep your job. Isabella's voice could have frozen nitrogen. You have 2 choices. Provide full transparency on the NovaCorp negotiation right now, or I'll assume you're hiding something and terminate you for cause. Your call. Adrian stared at her. For the first time since walking into the room, his composure cracked. Daniel saw it in his eyes. The calculation, the weighing of options, the realization that he'd played his hand and come up short. I want my lawyer present, Adrian said finally. That's all I needed to hear. Isabella looked at Margaret. I'm recommending immediate suspension pending a full investigation, I want Adrian's access to all Asterion systems revoked. I want a forensic audit of every communication he's had with Meridian, and I want the investment agreement voided immediately. Isabella, you're making a mistake. Adrian's voice had lost its pleasant edge. You void this agreement, you lose the capital infusion. You lose investor confidence. Your stock price will tank. Maybe, but at least I'll still own my company. You don't have the authority to void a board-approved agreement. Actually, she does. Margaret was still reading the documents. Clause 27. Either party may void the agreement within the first 30 days if material misrepresentation is discovered. I'd say deliberately hiding a consulting relationship with the investment group while negotiating terms that benefit them constitutes misrepresentation. I disclosed the relationship. You disclosed consulting fees. You didn't disclose that you were being paid to deliver Asterion into Meridian's control. Margaret set down the documents. I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of suspending Adrian Cross pending investigation? 8 hands went up. Only Voss and one other board member abstained. Motion carries. Margaret looked at Adrian. You're suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Any attempt to access Asterion systems or contact employees will be considered corporate espionage and reported to law enforcement. Adrian stood. His face had gone red. You're going to regret this, Isabella. All of you. When Meridian pulls their offer and your company collapses, remember that you chose to believe a mechanic over the man who's been protecting you for 3 years. I don't need protection from you, Adrian. I never did. You need protection from yourself, from your arrogance, from your inability to see that you can't run this company alone. He looked around the table. None of you can. Asterion is bleeding money. The Helix project is 6 months behind schedule. Your lead researcher just gave notice. And without Meridian's capital, you're going to collapse within the year. But sure, throw me out. Blame me when everything falls apart. He walked to the door, stopped, looked back at Isabella. I did love you, he said quietly. That part was real. Then he was gone. The room exhaled collectively. Margaret signaled to security through the glass wall. 2 guards appeared, moved toward the elevators where Adrian had disappeared. Well, Margaret said, that was unpleasant. Isabella, what's your plan for replacing the capital infusion? I'll find other investors, ones who aren't trying to steal my company. In how much time? Isabella hesitated. I don't know. Because Adrian was right about one thing. We need that capital. The Helix delays are real. Dr. Morrison's resignation is real. Our cash reserves will last maybe 9 months at current burn rate. Then we'll cut costs, delay non-essential projects, find efficiencies. Or we could accept that we need outside investment and find a legitimate partner instead of assuming everyone's trying to destroy us. Margaret looked at Daniel. Mr. Carter, you've been very helpful in identifying this threat. Do you have any suggestions for how we move forward? Daniel blinked. You're asking me? You seem to have insights the rest of us missed, so yes, I'm asking. I'm a mechanic. You're a mechanic who used to be a strategic analyst, who spent 72 hours dissecting our finances and found vulnerabilities our entire legal department missed. That suggests you're qualified to have an opinion. Margaret leaned back. So what would you do if this were your company? Daniel looked at Isabella. She nodded slightly. I'd stop looking for one big investor and start building a coalition of smaller ones, Daniel said. Spread the risk. Keep control distributed so no single entity can threaten a takeover, and I'd be transparent about the challenges. The Helix delays, the researcher resignation, the cash flow concerns, because the only thing worse than admitting you have problems is having investors discover those problems after they've already committed capital. That's conventional wisdom, Voss said. Multiple small investors means multiple relationships to manage, more complexity, higher legal costs. It also means no single point of failure, Daniel said. One investor pulls out, you've still got the others. Someone tries to engineer a hostile takeover. They can't do it without convincing a dozen different parties to cooperate. Margaret was nodding slowly. It's conservative, but given what we just learned about concentrated investment risk, conservative might be smart. It'll take time, Voss said. Time we may not have. Then we buy time. Isabella stood. We announce the Meridian deal is off. We spin it as us choosing to maintain independence rather than accepting unfavorable terms. We leak enough about Adrian's consulting arrangement to make it clear we avoided a bullet, and we use that narrative to approach other investors from a position of strength instead of desperation. That could work, Margaret said. If we move fast, if we control the story before Meridian does. I'll draft a press release, Isabella said. We'll put it out today, before Adrian has time to coordinate with Meridian on their counter-narrative. She looked at Daniel. Can you stay? I'm going to need help reviewing our investor approach strategy. Daniel checked his watch, nearly 11. He'd promised his sister he'd pick up Emma this afternoon. I can give you until 3. That'll work. The board meeting dissolved into smaller conversations. Margaret and Voss huddled over the contract documents. The other board members drifted toward the door, murmuring to each other. Daniel started gathering his papers. Isabella touched his arm. Thank you. For what? For being right. For pushing when I didn't want to hear it. For... She stopped, shook her head. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't crashed that gala. Probably signed a contract and lost your company. Probably. She smiled. It was tired, but genuine. You're good at this, you know. The analysis, the investigation. You should consider doing it professionally again. I have a job. You have a skill set that's being wasted on oil changes. Isabella picked up her folder. Think about it. We could use someone like you here, someone who isn't afraid to ask hard questions. You have an entire legal department for that. I have a legal department that missed a hostile takeover hidden in plain sight. I need someone who sees patterns, who connects dots, who... The conference room door burst open. Claire stood there, her face pale, holding her tablet like a shield. Ms. Hart, we have a problem. Isabella's expression went flat. What kind of problem? Channel 7 just broke a story. They're calling it corporate fraud. They're saying you and Mr. Carter fabricated evidence to remove Adrian Cross because he discovered financial irregularities you were trying to hide. That's absurd. Show me. Claire turned the tablet around. The screen showed a news anchor, professional and serious, with a chyron reading Asterion Dynamics Scandal, CEO accused of fraud. Sources close to the company, the anchor was saying, indicate that Isabella Hart, CEO of Asterion Dynamics, may have used fabricated financial documents to remove her fiancé, Adrian Cross, after he discovered evidence of accounting fraud within the company. Cross, a respected business consultant, allegedly confronted Hart about the irregularities and was immediately suspended. Hart then enlisted Daniel Carter, a disgraced former analyst with a history of professional misconduct, to manufacture evidence supporting her claims. The screen cut to a photo of Daniel. It was from 8 years ago, younger, cleaner, wearing a suit. The photo from his Kellerman employee badge. Carter, the anchor continued, was terminated from Kellerman Strategic Group in 2018 following accusations of professional negligence that led to a major client collapse. Industry sources describe him as unstable, vindictive, and willing to fabricate evidence to support conspiracy theories. Isabella's hand was shaking. Who leaked this? It gets worse, Claire said. She swiped to another screen. Adrian just filed a lawsuit. Wrongful termination. Defamation. He's claiming you and Mr. Carter colluded to destroy his reputation and are using your relationship to cover up Asterion's financial problems. We don't have a relationship. The lawsuit says otherwise. It includes emails between you and Mr. Carter that supposedly show... Claire stopped, turned the tablet toward Isabella. Daniel couldn't see the screen, but he saw Isabella's face go white. Those are taken out of context, Isabella said. What emails? Daniel asked. Isabella didn't answer. She was staring at the tablet like it had grown teeth. Claire cleared her throat. The lawsuit alleges that you and Mr. Carter have been romantically involved for several months, that you helped him fabricate his credentials to access Asterion systems, that the entire investigation was staged to remove Adrian so you could continue your affair without interference. That's insane, Daniel said. We met 4 days ago. The emails suggest otherwise. Claire showed him the screen. Daniel read the first message. It was from Isabella's corporate account to an address he didn't recognize, dated 3 months ago. The content was innocuous, thank you for some unspecified help, but the tone was friendly, familiar, the kind of thing you'd write to someone you knew well. The second email was worse. A message from the same unknown address to Isabella, signed with his name, discussing our plan to expose the truth about Adrian. I didn't write that, Daniel said. Your email signature is at the bottom. Anyone can fake an email signature. This is... He stopped, looked at Isabella. This is what they do. Adrian and Meridian. They destroy credibility. They control the narrative. We just watched them do it to Helix Biosystems and Quantum Therapeutics. Now they're doing it to us. Well, they're doing a hell of a job. Margaret was reading something on her own phone. The Wall Street Journal just picked up the story. So did Bloomberg. Adrian gave an exclusive interview to Financial Times claiming he has evidence of systemic fraud at Asterion dating back 2 years. He's lying, Isabella said. Of course he's lying, but he's lying convincingly. And unless we can prove these emails are fabricated, the board is going to have to distance itself from both of you to protect the company's reputation. You just voted to suspend him. We voted to suspend him pending investigation, not to publicly accuse him of fraud based on evidence that's now being called into question. Margaret set down her phone. Isabella, I'm sorry, but until we can verify the authenticity of the financial documents Mr. Carter provided, the board needs you to step back. Step back? Temporary leave. Voss will serve as interim CEO while we conduct an independent audit. You're removing me from my own company? We're protecting the company from a PR disaster. If even half of what Adrian is claiming turns out to be true, we could lose every investor we have. The stock price is already dropping. Isabella looked like she'd been slapped. I built this company. I've given everything to... And we're grateful. But right now your presence is a liability. Margaret stood. I'm calling an emergency board vote for this afternoon. I suggest you and Mr. Carter prepare your defense. You're going to need it. She left. So did Claire. So did everyone else, until it was just Daniel and Isabella standing in the conference room surrounded by documents that suddenly felt like weapons pointed the wrong direction. This is my fault, Daniel said. I should have seen this coming, should have known they'd have a backup plan. You're not psychic. Isabella's voice was hollow. And Adrian's right. I can't run this company alone. I thought I could, but... She stopped, pressed her hands against the table. I'm going to lose everything, aren't I? Not if we prove the emails are fake. How? They're in my account. They have my signature. Even if we prove they were planted, by the time we clear our names, the damage will be done. The investors will be gone. The board will have replaced me. Asterion will be... She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Daniel looked at the documents spread across the table, the wire transfers, the bank statements, the evidence that had seemed so solid an hour ago and now felt like sand slipping through his fingers. He thought about Emma, about his sister's voice on the phone last night asking what the hell he was doing, about the life he'd built, small and safe and carefully controlled, that he was about to lose because he'd stopped at a car crash on the highway. He thought about Isabella, standing in her penthouse barefoot, learning that the man she loved had been lying to her for 3 years. He thought about the mechanic who'd crashed a gala because it was the right thing to do. We're not done yet, Daniel said. Isabella looked at him. What? We're not done. Adrian thinks he's won because he controlled the story first, but he made a mistake. What mistake? He filed a lawsuit, which means he has to defend his claims in court, which means discovery, which means we get access to every email, every phone record, every document he has. And when we do, we're going to find proof that he fabricated those emails. Because people like Adrian, people who are good at lying, they always get cocky. They always leave a trail. That could take months. Then we'd better get started. Daniel gathered the documents, started sorting them into stacks. Isabella watched him for a moment, then joined in, organizing papers with the kind of mechanical precision that came from needing something to do with your hands while your world collapsed. They worked in silence for 5 minutes. Then Isabella said, "Why are you still here?" "What?" "You could walk away. Let me handle this alone. Instead, you're sorting through documents for a lawsuit that's going to destroy both our reputations. Why?" Daniel looked at her. At this woman who'd given a mechanic 72 hours when she could have had him arrested. Who'd stood up to her own board, her own fiancé, everyone who told her to ignore the warning signs. Because 8 years ago, I walked away from a fight I should have finished, he said. I'm not making that mistake again. Isabella smiled. It was small and broken, but real. Okay, she said. Then let's finish it. They had 6 hours before the emergency board meeting. Daniel spent the first hour on the phone with Tom Brennan, explaining why the forensic analysis they'd done 2 days ago was now being called fabricated evidence by a man facing suspension for corporate fraud. Tom's response was 3 minutes of creative profanity, followed by a promise to document every step of his verification process in a format that would hold up in court. Isabella spent that same hour locked in her office, door closed, speaking to lawyers whose hourly rates made Daniel's monthly rent look like pocket change. When she emerged, her eyes were red, but her jaw was set. My attorney says Adrian's lawsuit is performative, she said. It's designed to create doubt, not to win in court, which means we don't need to defeat it legally. We just need to expose it publicly before the board meeting. How? By finding whoever helped him plant those emails in my account. Because Adrian's good with people, but he's not good with technology. He needed help. Daniel pulled up the fabricated emails on his laptop, studied the metadata. The messages had been sent from an IP address that traced back to a server farm in Virginia, routed through 3 proxies to obscure the origin point. Professional work. The kind of thing that required either serious technical skill or access to someone who had it. You have an IT department, Daniel said. I have 12 people in IT. Any one of them could have done this. Then we narrow it down. Who had access to your email account? Everyone in IT has administrative access for maintenance purposes. Who's worked here long enough to know your communication patterns, to fake emails that sound like you? Isabella thought for a moment. Sarah Kim, she's been our systems administrator for 4 years, handles all the executive accounts. Where is she now? Probably in the server room, 3rd floor. They took the stairs. Partly because the elevators felt too slow, partly because Daniel needed to move, to burn off the nervous energy that came from knowing you had 5 hours to prove something that might be impossible to prove. The 3rd floor smelled like recycled air and carpet glue. The server room was behind a locked door at the end of a hallway lined with supply closets. Isabella swiped her badge. The lock clicked green. Inside, banks of servers hummed and blinked, filling the space with white noise and the particular cold that came from industrial air conditioning working overtime. A woman in her 30s sat at a workstation in the corner, wearing headphones, fingers flying across a keyboard. Isabella tapped her shoulder. The woman jumped, yanked off the headphones. Jesus, Ms. Hart, you scared me. Sorry, Sarah, we need to talk. Sarah's eyes flicked to Daniel, then back to Isabella. Is this about the emails? Because I already told the attorneys I didn't. I'm not accusing you of anything, Isabella said. I'm asking for help. Someone planted false emails in my account. Someone with administrator access and knowledge of how I communicate. I need to know who. Sarah's expression shifted from defensive to intrigued. She was young, Daniel realized. Probably late 20s. The kind of person who'd grown up with computers the way earlier generations had grown up with cars, understanding them at an intuitive level that made the technology feel like an extension of their own nervous system. You think it was an inside job, Sarah said. I think it had to be. Those emails appeared in my sent folder, in my account history, with all the correct metadata. That's not something you can do from outside the network. It's not something you can do easily from inside the network either. Sarah turned back to her workstation, pulled up a series of screens that looked like the Matrix had a baby with an Excel spreadsheet. Our email system logs every action, every login, every sent message, every deletion. If someone planted emails, there should be a record of the access. Should be? Unless they knew how to erase the logs, which would require root-level system access. Sarah's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up logs, scanning through data. When were these emails supposedly sent? Isabella gave her the dates. Sarah typed, scrolled, frowned. That's weird. What? There's a gap. Right here, 3 months ago, there's a 4-hour window where the email server logs are missing. Not corrupted, not incomplete, just gone. Could that happen accidentally? No, log files don't just disappear. Someone deleted them. Sarah opened another window. But here's the thing about deleting digital records. You can erase the file, but you can't erase the fact that the file existed. The system keeps a backup index. And according to this index, during that 4-hour window, your account sent 17 messages. I didn't send 17 messages, Isabella said. I know, because I can see your actual sent folder from that day. You sent 3 messages, which means 14 messages were created, logged, then removed from your sent folder but kept in the backup system to make them look real. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. Can you recover the deleted logs? See who accessed the system during that window? Maybe. Give me a minute. Sarah's minute turned into 10. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up screens, running commands that scrolled past too fast for Daniel to follow. Isabella stood behind her, arms crossed, watching with the intensity of someone watching a surgeon operate on a loved one. Finally, Sarah sat back. Got it. During that 4-hour window, there were 3 administrative logins to the email server. One was me, doing routine maintenance. One was Marcus Obi, our head of IT security, and one was from an external IP address using Marcus's credentials. Someone stole his login. Or he gave it to them. Sarah pulled up the external IP. This address traces back to a coffee shop in Santa Monica. Free Wi-Fi, no security cameras according to their Yelp reviews. Whoever did this knew how to cover their tracks. Can you tell what they did during that login session? Yeah, they created a dummy account that mimicked your email signature and communication style. Sent messages to that account from your account, then deleted your copies but preserved the sent records to make it look like you'd communicated with this person over several months. Who was the dummy account registered to? Sarah clicked through several screens. Daniel Carter. Isabella looked at Daniel. He looked back. They framed both of us, she said. They framed both of us, he agreed. Marcus Obi. Isabella pulled out her phone. Where is he right now? Sarah checked something on her screen. He called in sick this morning. First sick day he's taken in 2 years. That's not suspicious at all. Daniel was already moving toward the door. You have his home address? I'm not supposed to give out employee addresses. Isabella gave her a look. He lives in Culver City, Sarah said. I'll text you the address. They took Daniel's truck because Isabella's driver would have asked questions, and they didn't have time for questions. The afternoon traffic was building, the 10 freeway a parking lot of brake lights and frustration. Daniel took surface streets, weaving through neighborhoods where the houses got smaller and the yards got bigger, until they hit a street lined with modest ranch homes from the 60s. Marcus Obi's house was third from the corner, painted blue with white trim, a Toyota Camry in the driveway. The front yard needed mowing. The mailbox was stuffed with flyers. Daniel parked across the street. What's the plan? We knock on the door and ask him why he helped Adrian frame us for corporate fraud. And if he doesn't want to talk, then we make it very clear that his choices are talking to us or talking to the FBI. Isabella opened the truck door. Come on. They crossed the street, walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. Daniel knocked, waited. Knocked again, harder. The door opened 6 inches. A man peered through the gap, early 40s, glasses, the kind of pale that came from spending most of your life indoors staring at screens. When he saw Isabella, his face went from confused to terrified. Ms. Hart, we need to talk, Marcus. I'm sick, I can't. You're not sick, you're hiding. And unless you want to spend the next 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, you're going to let us in and explain why you helped Adrian Cross plant false emails in my account. Marcus stared at her, at Daniel, back at her. His hand trembled on the doorknob. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. We have the server logs, we have the IP address, we have everything except your explanation for why you did it. Isabella's voice went quiet, dangerous. And I'm trying very hard to believe you had a good reason. So please, Marcus, let us in. Marcus hesitated, then he stepped back and opened the door. The inside of the house was neat in the way that lonely people kept their spaces neat. Everything in its place. Nothing on the coffee table. A stack of computer magazines by the couch. Marcus gestured toward the living room, but didn't sit down himself. He stood by the window, looking out at the street like he expected police cars to arrive any second. "How much did he pay you?" Daniel asked. "It's not about money." "Then what is it about?" Marcus turned from the window. Up close, Daniel could see the exhaustion in his face, the kind of tired that came from carrying weight you couldn't put down. "My daughter has leukemia," Marcus said. "She's 9. We've been doing treatment for 18 months. My insurance covers most of it, but there are gaps. Experimental drugs, specialists, things that aren't in the standard protocol, but that her doctors say might help." He sat down on the couch like standing had become too much work. Adrian found out. "I don't know how. Maybe he was looking for leverage on people. Maybe it was random, but he came to me 3 months ago and said he could help." "With money," Isabella said. "With access. He had connections to a clinical trial at Cedars-Sinai, experimental immunotherapy. They only take 12 patients at a time, and the waiting list is 2 years long. Adrian got my daughter in within a week. In exchange for your help framing me." He didn't say that's what I was doing. He said you and Mr. Carter were having an affair, and he needed proof to show the board. He said you were making decisions based on personal relationships instead of what was best for the company. He made it sound like I was protecting Asterion. And you believed him. Marcus looked at his hands. I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was telling my daughter that she couldn't get treatment that might save her life because I had ethical concerns about my boss's email security. The room went quiet. Outside, a dog barked. A car drove past. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday afternoon in a neighborhood where people's biggest problems were supposed to be lawn care and property taxes. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am." Isabella walked to the window, stood there looking out at the same street Marcus had been watching. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "I'm not going to report you to the police." Marcus's head snapped up. "What?" "Because you're right. If someone offered me a way to save a person I loved, I'd probably make the same choice. But you're going to help us prove Adrian orchestrated this. You're going to testify that he coerced you, and you're going to provide every piece of evidence you have showing how he manipulated you into planting those emails. He'll destroy me. He'll have my daughter removed from the trial. No, he won't, because by the time we're done exposing what he did, he's not going to have the power to destroy anyone." Isabella turned from the window. "But I need you to be brave. I need you to stand up in front of the board and tell them the truth. Can you do that?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I can do that." They spent the next hour in Marcus's living room while he walked them through exactly what Adrian had asked him to do. The technical details of how he'd created the dummy account, planted the emails, erased the logs. He'd kept records of everything, he said, because some part of him had known this day would come. Backup files on a thumb drive, hidden in his daughter's room, insurance against the moment when Adrian decided Marcus knew too much. Daniel copied the files, verified the metadata, every email, every login, every deleted log entry, all time-stamped and documented in excruciating detail. It was enough. More than enough. They left Marcus's house at 3:30, with 2 hours until the board meeting and evidence that would tear Adrian's lawsuit to shreds. Isabella made phone calls from the truck's passenger seat while Daniel navigated traffic back toward downtown. Her lawyer, her PR team, Margaret Chen explaining what they'd found and demanding the board meeting be extended to allow them time to present their defense. By the time they reached Asterion, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the glass building gold and orange. Claire met them in the lobby with coffee and an expression that suggested the last few hours had aged her several years. "The board is assembling now," she said. "Ms. Hart, they're expecting your resignation." "They're going to be disappointed," Isabella said. The boardroom looked different than it had that morning. Someone had rearranged the chairs, put Isabella at the center of the table instead of at the head, defendant's position instead of leadership. Adrian sat across from her with a lawyer on each side, looking confident and relaxed. He smiled when Isabella walked in. "I'm glad you could make it," he said. "I was worried you might try to avoid this conversation." "I don't avoid conversations." especially ones where I get to watch liars face consequences. Adrian's smile didn't waver. Still clinging to your conspiracy theory, even after the evidence I've provided? Your evidence is fabricated. We can prove it. With what? More documents from your mechanic friend? More accusations with no substance? With testimony from the person you coerced into planting those emails. Isabella nodded to Daniel. He opened his laptop, pulled up the files Marcus had given them. Marcus Obi, your systems administrator, the man you blackmailed into framing us by threatening his daughter's access to medical treatment. Adrian's smile faltered, just for a second, just enough for Daniel to see the calculation behind his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You found out Marcus's daughter was sick. You got her into a clinical trial at Cedars-Sinai through your connections with Meridian. And in exchange, you had him create false emails making it look like Isabella and I were coordinating to remove you from the company. That's an interesting story. Do you have any proof? Daniel turned the laptop around, showed the board the logs, the deleted files, the backup documentation, every piece of evidence laid out in chronological order, showing exactly how Adrian had manipulated a desperate father into committing corporate espionage. We have Marcus's testimony, Isabella said. We have the server log showing the fraudulent access. We have the dummy email account created using Daniel's name. And we have documentation of the clinical trial enrollment, which happened 3 days after Marcus first helped you plant evidence. The room had gone quiet. Margaret was reading through the files on her own tablet, her expression unreadable. Voss was making notes. The other board members were exchanging glances. Adrian stood. This is absurd. You're accusing me of blackmail based on circumstantial evidence and the word of a man you probably coerced into lying. The fact is, Isabella, you're desperate. Your company is failing. Your fiancé discovered evidence of fraud. And rather than accept responsibility, you're trying to destroy everyone around you. Sit down, Adrian, Margaret said. I will not sit down while... Sit down or I'll have security remove you. Adrian sat. His lawyers whispered something to him. He shook his head. Margaret set down her tablet. I've reviewed the evidence Ms. Hart provided. The server logs appear authentic. The timeline is consistent. And frankly, Adrian, your behavior over the past 72 hours has been that of a man with something to hide, not someone falsely accused. You're taking her word over mine based on files that could have been manufactured in the last hour? I'm taking her word over yours because she's the one who built this company from nothing while you were collecting consulting fees from the investment group trying to steal it. Margaret looked around the table. I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of reinstating Isabella Hart as CEO with immediate effect? 9 hands went up. Only Adrian's lawyers abstained. Motion carries. Isabella, you're reinstated. Adrian, your suspension is upgraded to termination for cause. Your lawsuit is frivolous and will be filing a countersuit for fraud, defamation, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. Adrian's face had gone red. You're making a mistake, all of you. Meridian will do nothing, Isabella said, because by tomorrow morning, every major outlet in the country is going to know exactly what they tried to do here. And no legitimate company will touch them with a 10-foot pole after we're done exposing their pattern of predatory acquisitions. You think you've won? Adrian stood. His lawyers tried to stop him, but he shrugged them off. You think you've beaten me? But all you've done is guarantee Asterion's collapse. Without Meridian's capital, you've got maybe 6 months before the cash runs out. The Helix project is a disaster. Your lead researcher quit because he knows it's never going to work. And when this company implodes, when you're standing in the ruins of everything you built, remember that I gave you a way out and you were too arrogant to take it. He walked to the door, stopped, looked back at Isabella one last time. I did love you, he said again. And I could have saved you, but you chose him instead. He gestured at Daniel. Then he was gone, his lawyers scrambling after him, leaving nothing behind but silence and the faint smell of expensive cologne. Margaret cleared her throat. Well, that was dramatic. Isabella, what's your plan for replacing the capital? I'm working on it. Work faster. The board just took a significant risk backing you. Don't make us regret it. The meeting dissolved. Board members filed out, some offering congratulations, others just nodding and leaving. Within 10 minutes, it was just Isabella and Daniel in the boardroom, surrounded by documents and the residue of a fight they'd barely won. You should go, Isabella said. It's after 5. Don't you need to pick up your daughter? Daniel checked his phone. 6 missed calls from his sister. 3 increasingly worried text messages. He'd promised to be there by 4. Yeah, I should go. Thank you, Daniel, for everything. I don't know what I would have... You would have figured it out. You always do. Maybe, maybe not. She gathered her papers, started organizing them into neat stacks. Are you going to think about what I said? About working here? I have a job. You have a job that wastes your talent. You could do real work here. Important work. I do important work. I keep people's cars running so they can get to their real jobs. Isabella looked at him. Is that really what you think? That the last 8 years have been penance for a mistake you made when you were trying to do the right thing? I think the last 8 years have been me learning to stay in my lane. And what if your lane is bigger than you think it is? Daniel didn't have an answer for that. He picked up his laptop, headed for the door, stopped. Adrian was wrong, you know, about the Helix project. How do you know? Because I read your research reports while I was investigating the Meridian deal. The delays aren't technical failures. They're safety precautions. You're building something that could actually help people, and you're refusing to cut corners to meet arbitrary deadlines. That's not a disaster. That's integrity. Integrity doesn't pay the bills. No, but it's the reason people want to invest in you. Daniel opened the door. You'll find your funding, and when you do, it'll be from people who believe in what you're building, not people trying to steal it. He left before she could respond. Took the elevator down 23 floors, walked through the lobby where this whole thing had started 4 days ago when he was just a mechanic who'd stopped at a car crash. His truck was still in the garage, dusty and out of place among the Teslas and Mercedes. The drive to his sister's house took 40 minutes through rush hour traffic. He spent it thinking about what came next. His 15 minutes of fame were over. Tomorrow the news would move on to some other scandal, some other crisis. The reporters would stop calling. The board would go back to pretending mechanics didn't exist. And Daniel would return to his garage, his duplex, his carefully controlled life. Except he'd proven something in the last 4 days. Proven that he could still do the work, still see the patterns, still connect the dots that everyone else missed. And maybe that mattered. Maybe that was enough. Emma was playing in the front yard when he pulled up, chasing his sister's dog in circles while his sister watched from the porch. When she saw the truck, Emma's face lit up. "Daddy!" She ran to him, crashed into his legs hard enough to make him stumble. Daniel picked her up, held her tight, felt something in his chest unclench for the first time in days. "I missed you, kiddo." "I missed you too. Sarah said you were on the news. She said you're famous." "Not famous, just busy." "Doing what?" "Helping someone who needed help." Emma looked at him with those serious eyes that were too old for 8, that had learned too young that the world was complicated and adults didn't always have answers. "Did it work?" she asked. "Yeah," Daniel said. "It worked." His sister walked over, gave him a hug that lasted long enough to communicate both relief and annoyance. "You scared me," she said. "I saw your face on TV next to words like fraud and conspiracy, and I thought, I'm fine. It's over." "Is it?" Daniel looked at Emma, still in his arms, watching him with those too serious eyes. "Yeah," he said, "it's over." But even as he said it, his phone was buzzing in his pocket. A text from Isabella. "The board approved emergency funding to keep us running for 6 months. We're holding a press conference tomorrow at 10 to announce new investor partnerships. I'd like you to be there." Daniel stared at the message. Thought about oil changes and brake jobs, and the comfortable predictability of work that started and ended with tangible problems you could fix with your hands. Thought about boardrooms and investigations, and the particular thrill of seeing patterns no one else could see. Thought about Emma, watching him, waiting to see what choice her father would make. He typed back, "I'll be there." The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m., which gave Daniel exactly enough time to drop Emma at school, realize his only clean shirt had a coffee stain on the collar, and arrive at Asterion's lobby at 9:58 wearing the same jacket he'd worn to the gala 5 days ago. Claire met him at the security desk with an expression that suggested she'd stopped being surprised by anything he did. "Ms. Hart is in the green room," she said. "Follow me." The The green room was neither green nor particularly room-like, more of a glorified closet with a mirror and 2 chairs, where people waited before facing cameras and questions they couldn't fully control. Isabella stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her collar for the 3rd time in as many seconds. She wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Daniel's truck, but her hands were shaking. "You came," she said. "You asked me to. I wasn't sure you would. After everything—" She stopped adjusting her collar, turned to face him. "I'm offering you a job. Director of Risk Assessment and Strategic Analysis. You'd report directly to me. Salary is $200,000 to start, full benefits, stock options. You'd have a team of 3 analysts and carte blanche to investigate anything you think poses a threat to the company." Daniel blinked. "That's more than a mechanic makes, I know. But you're not a mechanic, Daniel. You're someone who sees things other people miss, who asks questions other people are afraid to ask. And I need that. Asterion needs that. I have a daughter. The job has flexible hours. You can work from home when you need to. Pick her to school, pick her up, be there for the things that matter. Isabella, I'm not asking you to save me again. I'm asking you to build something with me. A company that doesn't hide its problems, doesn't cut corners, doesn't sacrifice integrity for profit. The kind of company you would have wanted to work for 8 years ago before everything fell apart." Daniel looked at her, at this woman who'd taken a risk on a stranger because he'd been crazy enough to crash her gala with a warning she didn't want to hear, who'd fought her own board, her own fiancé, the entire weight of corporate power to do what was right, even when it would have been easier to do what was safe. "I need to think about it," he said. "Fair enough, but think fast. The offer expires in 72 hours. She smiled. It was tired, but genuine. "I seem to do my best work on that timeline." A knock on the door. Claire's voice. "Ms. Hart, we're ready for you." The press room was a wall of cameras and lights and reporters who'd smelled blood in the water and showed up hoping for a feeding frenzy. Daniel stood off to the side while Isabella took her place at the podium, flanked by Margaret Chen and 2 board members whose names Daniel had already forgotten. The room quieted. "Good morning," Isabella said. "Thank you for being here. 5 days ago, Asterion Dynamics was preparing to sign an investment agreement with Meridian Capital Holdings. Today I'm here to explain why that agreement will never be signed and what we've learned about the tactics certain firms use to acquire companies through deception rather than honest negotiation." She laid it out methodically. The hidden takeover clause, Adrian's consulting relationship with Meridian, the fabricated emails, the coercion of Marcus Obi. Every piece of the story delivered in clear, unemotional language that made the facts speak for themselves. When she finished, the reporters erupted with questions. "Ms. Hart, are you filing criminal charges against Adrian Cross?" "We're coordinating with federal prosecutors. The decision on criminal charges will be theirs." "What about Meridian Capital? Will you pursue legal action against them?" "We're exploring all options. But our primary focus is on protecting Asterion and ensuring this kind of predatory acquisition attempt doesn't succeed." "You mentioned new investors. Can you provide details?" "We've secured commitments from a coalition of smaller investment firms and private equity groups. No single entity will hold more than 8% of the company. This structure protects us from the kind of concentrated risk that made Meridian's strategy possible." "Some analysts are saying Asterion is in financial trouble regardless of the Meridian deal. How do you respond?" Isabella paused. Daniel saw her hands tighten on the podium. "We face challenges," she said. "The Helix project is behind schedule because we refuse to rush a product that needs to be perfect. We've had personnel changes because we're committed to building a team that shares our values. And yes, we've had to make difficult decisions about capital allocation. But Asterion isn't in trouble. We're in transition. And sometimes transition looks like trouble to people who measure success by quarterly earnings instead of long-term impact." A reporter in the 3rd row raised his hand. "Ms. Hart, there are rumors that you and Daniel Carter, the man who first identified the problems with the Meridian agreement, are romantically involved. Can you address those rumors?" The room went silent. Every camera focused on Isabella. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Isabella looked directly at the reporter. "Mr. Carter and I met 5 days ago when he interrupted my gala to warn me about a contract I was about to sign. Since then, we've worked together to expose a conspiracy that could have destroyed this company." Our relationship is professional. And frankly, the suggestion that a woman CEO can't work closely with a male colleague without romantic involvement is exactly the kind of outdated thinking that makes it harder for women to lead companies in the first place. The reporter tried to follow up, but Isabella cut him off. We're done here. Thank you for your time. She stepped away from the podium. The reporters kept shouting questions, but Isabella ignored them, walking past the cameras with Margaret and the board members trailing behind. Daniel followed, catching up to her in the hallway outside. That went well, he said. Did it? I just told the entire financial press that we're in transition, which is code for we're struggling and hoping people don't notice. You told them the truth. That's better than lying and getting caught later. Is it? Isabella stopped walking, leaned against the wall. Adrian was right about one thing. We're running out of time. The new investors bought us 6 months, maybe 9 if we're lucky. But if the Helix project doesn't launch, if we can't prove the technology works, none of this matters. We'll still collapse, just slower. Then make it work. You say that like it's simple. It's not simple, but it's possible. You've got the research, you've got the team. What you don't have is someone telling you it's okay to take the time you need to do it right. Daniel pushed off from the wall. 8 years ago, I rushed a risk assessment because everyone was pressuring me to approve the deal. And I was so desperate to please people, so afraid of being the obstacle, that I ignored every instinct telling me to slow down. Don't make my mistake. Isabella looked at him. What if we run out of money before we run out of time? Then you'll figure something out, because that's what you do. They stood there in the hallway while employees walked past, pretending not to stare, definitely staring. Daniel's phone buzzed, a text from his sister. Saw you on the news. Again. You're becoming a regular celebrity. Emma wants to know if she can tell her class her dad is famous. He smiled, typed back. Tell her dad is just a guy who was in the right place at the right time. His sister responded immediately. Pretty sure the right place was anywhere but that gala. But I'm proud of you anyway. Daniel looked up. Isabella was watching him. Your daughter? She asked. My sister. Emma's been telling everyone at school that her dad is a corporate investigator now. Is she wrong? I don't know what I am anymore. You're someone who stopped at a car crash when everyone else kept driving, someone who saw a problem and fixed it even though no one asked you to. Isabella straightened. That's not nothing, Daniel. That's the whole thing. Claire appeared around the corner, tablet in hand. Ms. Hart, the Wall Street Journal wants a follow-up interview, and Senator Morrison's office called. She wants to discuss corporate oversight reform and would like to use the Meridian situation as a case study. Tell the Journal yes. Tell the Senator's office I'll have my assistant coordinate schedules. Isabella looked at Daniel. I have about 6 hours of meetings. Think about the job offer, please. She walked away with Claire, leaving Daniel alone in the hallway. He took the elevator down, walked through the lobby where security now nodded at him instead of questioning his presence, and got into his truck. The engine turned over with a cough and a rattle that said the timing belt would need replacing soon. He drove to the garage where he worked, a squat building in Glendale that smelled like motor oil and optimism. His boss, Tony, was under a Honda Accord when Daniel walked in. Carter, where the hell have you been? You were supposed to work Monday and Tuesday. I called in. Family emergency. Family emergency that got you on the news? Tony rolled out from under the Accord, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. I saw you standing next to that billionaire CEO. What's that about? Long story. I got time. Daniel told him an abbreviated version. The gala, the contract, the investigation. Tony listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Tony, who had opinions about everything and shared them freely. When Daniel finished, Tony was quiet for a moment. Then he said, So what are you doing here? What do you mean? I mean, you just helped expose corporate fraud at a multi-billion-dollar company, and you're standing in my garage like you're about to change someone's oil. What are you doing here? I work here. You work here because 8 years ago you needed a job that didn't require explaining why you left your real job. But that's not who you are, Daniel. That's just who you've been hiding as. I'm not hiding. You're absolutely hiding. And I get it. You got burned. You made a mistake. You spent 8 years punishing yourself by doing work that's beneath your skill level. But at some point, punishment becomes habit, and habit becomes identity. And then you wake up one day and realize you've spent a decade being less than you are because it felt safer than risking being more. Daniel looked at his boss. This man who'd given him a job when no one else would, who'd never asked about his past, who'd treated him like a competent adult instead of a cautionary tale. "She offered me a job," Daniel said. "Director of Risk Assessment, $200,000 a year. Take it." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Tony stood up. "Look, you're a good mechanic, better than good. But you're a brilliant analyst, and the world needs brilliant analysts more than it needs another guy who can change brake pads. So yeah, take the job. Stop hiding. Be who you actually are." "What about Emma? What about her? You think she's better off with a dad who plays it safe, or a dad who shows her it's okay to take risks when the opportunity is right?" Daniel didn't have an answer for that. He worked the rest of the day in a daze, changing oil, rotating tires, replacing a serpentine belt on a Subaru that had seen better years. Normal work. Predictable work. Work that started and ended without complications. By 5 o'clock, he'd made his decision. He picked up Emma from after-school care, took her to the taco place she loved, and over carnitas and horchata, he told her about the job offer. "Would we have to move?" she asked. "No, but I'd be working different hours. Office job instead of garage work." "Would you wear a suit?" "Maybe sometimes." Emma considered this while working her way through a taco that was approximately the size of her head. "Would you be happy?" The question hit him harder than it should have. When was the last time someone had asked him that? When was the last time he'd asked himself? "I think so," he said. "Yeah, I think I would." "Then you should do it." Emma said this with the confidence of someone who'd never learned that life was supposed to be complicated. "Ms. Isabella seems nice, and you smiled more this week than you have in a long time." "I smiled?" "When you talked about the investigation, when you explained the contracts. You got excited like you used to get when you helped me with math homework, and we figured out a hard problem together." She took another bite of taco. "I like it when you're excited about things." Daniel reached across the table, squeezed his daughter's hand. This kid who'd lost her mother at 6 and spent the last 2 years watching her father shrink himself down to something manageable, who deserved better than a dad who'd given up on being more than functional. "Okay," he said. "I'll take the job." "Good," Emma grinned. "Can I tell my class?" "You can tell your class." That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and drafted an email to Isabella. 3 sentences, clean and simple. "I accept your offer. When do I start?" "Daniel." Her response came 6 minutes later. "Monday, 8 a.m. Welcome to Asterion." The weekend passed in a blur of logistics. Daniel gave Tony 2 weeks' notice, which Tony immediately waved off with instructions to leave Friday and not worry about it. He bought 3 dress shirts and 2 ties that didn't look like they belonged to someone's grandfather. He sat Emma down and explained that Daddy was going to have a different job now, which meant different hours, but also meant they could afford things like the class trip to Sacramento she'd said she didn't mind missing. Emma had hugged him so tight he couldn't breathe. Monday morning came with rain and traffic and the particular anxiety of first days. Daniel arrived at Asterion at 7:45, gave his name at security, and was issued a badge that said Director of Risk Assessment, like those words belonged to him. Claire met him in the lobby and walked him to an office on the 19th floor with windows overlooking the city and a desk that didn't have motor oil stains. "Ms. Hart will be here at 8:30 for your orientation meeting," Claire said. "Coffee is in the break room. Your login credentials are on the desk. Welcome to Asterion, Mr. Carter." She left. Daniel sat in the chair, looked at the computer, at the city outside the windows, at the badge clipped to his jacket. This version of himself felt strange, unfamiliar, like trying on clothes that used to fit and discovering your body had changed in ways you hadn't noticed. A knock on the door. Isabella walked in carrying 2 coffees, handed one to Daniel. "First day?" she said. "First day." "Nervous?" "Terrified." She smiled. "Good. That means you care." She sat down across from him. "I want to be clear about what this job is. You're not here to tell me what I want to hear. You're here to tell me what I need to know, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Can you do that? I crashed your gala to tell you your contract was going to destroy your company. I think I can handle uncomfortable. Fair point. Isabella took a sip of coffee. Your first assignment is reviewing the Helix project timeline. I want an honest assessment of whether we can make the current launch date or if we need to push it back. No corporate speak, no softening the message. Just the truth. What if the truth is that you need to delay 6 months and that tanks your investor confidence? Then we delay 6 months and I deal with the investors. But I'm not launching a product that isn't ready just because the board wants good news. She stood. That's the whole point of having you here, Daniel. So I can make decisions based on reality instead of wishful thinking. She left him with the coffee and the assignment and a sense that maybe, possibly, he'd made the right choice. The next 3 months were a masterclass in organized chaos. Daniel assembled his team, 2 analysts fresh out of grad school and a former SEC investigator who'd gotten tired of government bureaucracy. Together they tore apart Asterion's operations looking for vulnerabilities, inefficiencies, and risks that everyone else had learned to ignore. They found plenty. Supply chain dependencies that could cripple production if a single vendor failed. Cybersecurity gaps that made Daniel's hands sweat. Financial projections based on assumptions that were optimistic at best and delusional at worst. He reported everything to Isabella, who took each piece of bad news with the same calm focus she'd shown when he'd first warned her about the Meridian contract. She didn't shoot the messenger. She didn't make excuses. She just asked what it would take to fix the problem and then allocated resources to fix it. The Helix project timeline turned out to be worse than anyone had admitted. Daniel's assessment concluded they needed 9 more months minimum, possibly 12. Isabella announced the delay at the next board meeting and watched the stock price drop 8% in a day. It climbed back within a week when she published a transparent breakdown of why the delay was necessary and what they were doing to ensure the product would actually work when it launched. Investors, it turned out, appreciated honesty more than they appreciated fiction. Dr. Morrison, the researcher who'd resigned, came back, said he'd left because he couldn't work for a company that prioritized deadlines over data. But if Asterion was changing its approach, he wanted to be part of it. By month 4, the company had stabilized. Not grown, not exploded into profitability, just stabilized, found its footing, started operating like a business that knew what it was instead of a business trying to be what investors wanted. Daniel fell into a routine: school drop-off, office by 9, analysis until 3, pick up Emma, help with homework, repeat. It wasn't the life he'd planned 8 years ago, but it was a life he'd chosen, and that made all the difference. On a Thursday in early spring, Isabella knocked on his office door with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "We got FDA approval for the Helix clinical trials," she said. "We launch in 6 months." Daniel took a glass. "That's huge. It's everything." She poured, handed him the champagne. "And it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't crashed that gala. If you hadn't pushed me to see what I was walking into. If you hadn't—" She stopped, shook her head. "Thank you, Daniel, for all of it." They toasted, drank champagne that cost more than Daniel used to make in a week. Through the window, the city stretched away in every direction, full of people living lives that intersected and diverged in ways no one could predict. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just kept driving that night?" Isabella asked. "If you'd passed the accident without stopping?" "All the time." And I think I'd still be changing oil in Tony's garage, telling myself I was fine with it, wondering why I felt like I was suffocating. You weren't fine with it. No. But I'd convinced myself that safe was the same as okay, that if I just kept my head down and didn't take risks, I wouldn't get hurt again. Daniel set down his glass. Turns out the biggest risk was not taking any risks at all. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was going to marry him, Adrian. We'd set a date, sent save the dates. My mother was already planning the reception. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm not." She looked at the champagne in her glass. "I thought I loved him because he made everything seem manageable. Like as long as he was there, I didn't have to carry the weight of the company alone. But that wasn't love. That was fear dressed up as partnership. What's love then? I don't know. But I think it's probably the opposite of that. Someone who makes you stronger instead of just making you feel less weak. She finished her champagne. Anyway, I'm done talking about Adrian. Let's talk about you. What about me? Emma's birthday is next week, right? Daniel blinked. How did you know that? Claire keeps track of these things. She's terrifying. Isabella smiled. I was thinking maybe we could do something, not work-related, just, I don't know, dinner or something, a celebration. You want to take my daughter to dinner for her birthday? If that's weird, forget I said anything. It's not weird. It's... Daniel stopped. Looked at this woman who'd given him a second chance at the work he loved, who trusted him enough to tell her hard truths, who saw him as something other than a cautionary tale. It's really nice. Thank you. So that's a yes? That's a yes. They had dinner the following Saturday at a pizza place Emma loved. The kind with arcade games and chaos and cheese that stretched 3 feet when you pulled a slice. Isabella showed up in jeans and a sweater, no makeup, looking more like a regular person than a billionaire CEO. Emma took to her immediately, dragging her to the skee-ball machines and explaining the complex strategy required to win enough tickets for the good prizes. Daniel watched them from a table covered in pizza grease and melted cheese, his daughter and his boss laughing over a game that cost $0.25 to play, and felt something in his chest crack open. Not break, just open, like a door he'd kept locked for 8 years finally swinging wide. After dinner, after Emma had used her tickets to get a stuffed penguin that was already her favorite thing in the world, after they dropped Isabella at her building downtown, Emma turned to Daniel in the truck. I like her, she said. Me too. Are you going to marry her? Daniel nearly drove into a parked car. What? No, we work together, that's all. But you smile when you talk about her, the same way you used to smile when you talked about Mom. Daniel pulled over, turned in his seat to face his daughter. Emma, Ms. Isabella and I are friends. Good friends. But that's all we are right now. Right now? Right now. Emma considered this with the seriousness of someone twice her age. Okay, but if that changes, I think it would be okay. I think Mom would think it was okay too. Daniel hugged his daughter, held her tight while the city moved around them, people going places, living lives, making choices that would ripple forward in ways they couldn't see. 6 months later, the Helix project launched. The FDA approval came through. The clinical trials showed results that made the medical community take notice. Asterion's stock price climbed. The investors who'd stuck with Isabella through the delays and the restructuring saw their faith rewarded. Daniel got promoted to VP of Strategic Operations. His team grew to 12 people. He bought a house with a yard where Emma could play. He took her to Sacramento on that class trip she'd missed, and to Disneyland, and to a dozen other places they'd only talked about when money was tight and dreams were things you put on hold. And somewhere in the middle of all that, between the board meetings and the school plays, between the risk assessments and the homework help, Daniel and Isabella stopped being just colleagues, stopped being just friends, became something neither of them had been looking for but both of them needed. It happened slowly, carefully. 2 people who'd been burned learning to trust again, building something real from honesty instead of pretending. A year after the gala, almost to the day, they had dinner at the same restaurant where Isabella had offered Daniel the job. She wore a black dress. He wore a suit that actually fit. And when the server brought champagne, Daniel raised his glass. To second chances, he said. To people who stop at car crashes when everyone else keeps driving, Isabella said. They toasted, drank. And sitting there in that restaurant, Daniel thought about the courier bag he'd pulled from a wrecked Honda, about the contract he'd read by flashlight on the side of the highway, about the choice to walk into a gala where he didn't belong and warn a stranger about danger she couldn't see. He thought about all the ways life could pivot on a single decision, all the ways we saved ourselves by saving others, all the ways the right thing and the hard thing were usually the same thing, and how doing it anyway was the only choice that mattered. Emma was at his sister's house tonight. Isabella's hand was in his across the table. The city lights stretched away outside the window, and Daniel Carter, former analyst turned mechanic turned director of risk assessment, felt something he hadn't felt in 8 years. He felt like himself. Not the person he'd tried to be at Kellerman, Not the person he'd hidden as in Tony's garage, just himself, flawed and uncertain and trying his best. Building a life from honesty instead of fear, showing his daughter that it was okay to fail, okay to fall, okay to get back up and try again, because that's what people did. They crashed and they burned and they rebuilt. They made mistakes and they learned from them. They stopped at accidents when they could have kept driving, and sometimes, if they were lucky, that choice changed everything. The server brought their food. Daniel squeezed Isabella's hand once before letting go to pick up his fork. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage started building something that might actually last. And that, Daniel thought, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.